Hi, everybody. Welcome to a new Rebalance Talk. Today with Massimo Moraglio, who was in the previous century. In the previous century, he studied political science and history, especially transportation history. And now he's professor at the Technical University in Berlin. Is the academic coordinator of the MBA in Sustainable Mobility and editor-in-chief of the Journal of Transportation History. Thanks for coming today, Massimo.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the invitation.
Okay, great. Let me begin this hour of talk with you, asking if a subject you have been thinking quite a lot, if our culture nowadays overestimates the value of speed and efficiency. If the value of productivity and the concept of excellent engineering and advanced technologies is overwhelming in the way we think about mobility. And I know you have been stating many times that transportation should be considered rather than a technological driven activity, a field beyond engineering or beyond technology, that we have to change our mindset when we are thinking about transportation and mobility. Maybe you could further elaborate on this.
Yeah, we'll try. Of course, it's a good question. The reason is the real question is why we move. And usually we give the answer that is because we have to satisfy a basic need. And then, of course, we use some sort of economic reasoning, or we use some technologies in order to achieve a better performance of this basic need. Here, I think there is, of course, a lot of true. Mobility is a basic need. But I would say that it's also a little bit misleading. So I don't want to throw away with the dirty water and the kids together. I think that economics and technology are very important in defining what is mobility. But I think that we are pushing our arguments too much. So the question for me comes, we should consider mobility in a wider perspective. And let me be provocative. When we talk about food, no one discusses food in terms of, okay, it's something we need to feed our body. Or when we talk about fashion, no one talks just about we use that to cover ourselves from the hot and the cold weather. In mobility, is different. We don't have this idea that fashion is a way to assess yourself and food is a part of our identity. We give for granted mobility is something that we do because we have a need. And in doing that, I think we are missing a lot of what is mobility. I think that we miss the symbolic evidence of mobility. Otherwise, without symbolic evidence, no one will buy a Ferrari. It's a very inconvenient way to move around, leaving alone parking a Ferrari. Again, I'm very provocative here, or the idea that mobility can be also not just for practical reasons. Actually, a lot of people are traveling for the sake of traveling, and there is a lot of new age comments. It's not important the final destination, but the travel and so on. I think the moment we are discussing seriously what is mobility and what pushes us to move, I think that we should put this in the center of the agenda. And I think that in this respect, let me also be critical here. The marketing offices of many companies are elaborating that in a very smart way, more than maybe the policymaker and the academia itself. So yes, we are a little bit trapped in that corner of mobility as just an asset. And the second point is how we define efficiency. I think that we define efficiency still today using 1920 paradigm of efficiency, which usually was linked to speed and to maximize capacities and so on. And I wonder how much after 1 century we can still rely on that idea of mobility and that idea of performance, because the world is changing so much, leaving alone, of course, the climate crisis that we are witnessing. I don't know how much I center your question, but feel free to make more comments on that.
Okay, no, it's good, Massimo. There are many people that think in the same way that you think, let's say. There are academics you have worked with in the so-called mobility turn area, like Mimi Scheller or Tim Creswell, other people. There are also writers like Milan Kundera that published book on slowness. There are Carlo Honoré, and there are, there's the slow food movement, there is a traffic calm movement, even not so far away book by Byung-Chul Han on the extent of time. So it seems that there are many different people on the different, let's say, humanistic, on academia, we are thinking this way. And maybe also in personal conversation with our neighbors, our family, our friends, also we talk in this way. But you think that this is a cultural change. We are witnessing a cultural change that will make a difference, and the politics are gonna change really, or this is what we say because we wish, but actually we do differently, and politics are not changing that much. What do you think?
Well, I would say that what we are seeing here is a weak signal. So it's a signal which is very weak. We can detect this change of concept and use of speed as a value. For many people, I'm talking here about Europe. I think that this is a very, let's say, North Atlantic idea. Speed and mobility altogether is not anymore for some people such an asset. But this is, of course, at the moment, part of few subgroups, is not becoming dominant. The question is how we define this weak signal, if this is a weak signal that we see growing, or if this is a weak signal which will fade away after 20 years, let's say so. This is the real bet. What I would like to say here is that we have a lot of evidence that we should rethink what is the real benefit of speed and which is the real allure of speed and mobility altogether, because COVID showed that immobility can be an asset now. So let's talk with speed. The idea of speed is, of course, related to the pleasure of going further without spending too much time. But there is a counter argument there that if you have to rush somewhere, it's because you don't have so much time. So actually, I'm using always the Wolfgang Goethe visiting Italy and spending 3 years in Italy, very slow, with a lot of servants. And he could do that because he was very rich and actually was very slow. Even at his time, at the end of the 18th century, trade people or diplomats, they have to rush. So showing slowness already at Goethe time was a sign of I have time, I can use time as I want, I don't have to rush. You, if you don't have all this time, if you're not rich like me, you have to rush because that's the point. This has been a little bit forgotten, but at some point, even this idea of going slow was not anymore appealing. If we think about the Concorde idea of this supersonic jet traveling so fast, because speed was an asset, again, we forgot a little bit this going slow. But now I think that we are back to another point where speed, we are back to Goethe. We are not anymore in the point where we say rushing is an asset. We are back to the point where even going slow is a way to sign your ranking, that you can waste time. Or we have to think mobility, and this is another important element we're trying to forget. We are doing a lot of multitasking during traveling, and we forget that. We always complain that in these days on the train, everyone is looking on the tablet. But if you get a 90-20 picture of people on the train commuting, everyone was reading a newspaper. So I don't see the big change here. What is the change is now we are a little bit aware that mobility and traveling is a multitasking activity. So I was suggesting to my kids to travel to Italy by train, but I say it's 15 hours, kids, it's a long ride. It can be boring. And the answer was, Do we have a seat on the internet? Because that's not an issue. This is revealing in two elements. First, the young people are not interested. I'm using my sons as anecdotal evidence. Young people are not anymore impressed by speed. They are saturated. I'm talking, of course, people that can travel, but more or less in Western Europe, we know that more or less everyone is traveling by plane. And the second element is how much this multitasking during traveling can be a winning point, and can satisfy request of less CO2 emission, longer time, but I offer you all the facilities to have your life, which is in these days, especially for young generation, a lot online. So my point is that we have a combination of factors which create a weak signal, and then we have to understand where this weak signal is going, if it's growing or not. And then let me add that even mobility as such is becoming more on the side of the burden than an asset. Of course, I'm the wrong person to say so. I changed country, I moved to Germany, I experienced a lot of change in my life. I'm very multi-culti family. So for me, traveling is still a discovery side. But I wonder, especially after COVID, how much the ability to be immobile has becoming an asset. And if you think people like me, we are very privileged that we can stay home to work. And we are not forced to travel in a very pandemic world. That was rather interesting to notice how this reversed very quickly. To be immobile was becoming something very valuable. Mm-hmm. And the question again is how much COVID will stay there? How much COVID can be also trigger maybe a multi-location lifestyle where people are moving to Portugal to work 6 months in there and then coming back just for a couple of meetings because you have to do that face-to-face. These are open questions which I think we have to address because it can be very disruptive, not just our conception of mobility, but also in terms of industry, how the industry will cope with that, because the industry is aware of that and they are a little bit worried because, of course, it's very disruptive.
Mm-hmm. So Massimo, correct me if I'm wrong, but I get the impression from your answer that you do believe that there is something that is changing culturally, that we are going back to recognize Goethe as a ideal traveler, let's say, that going fast is not always the best we can do. So in a way, going back to Han, the Korean philosopher, mm-hmm. So it seems that we are recognizing again vita contemplativa, so dolce far niente. We are saying that this is not laziness, that this is creation as well. So being always busy, always occupied, always working, this is not prestigious anymore. So we don't have to be ashamed of not working as much as we can. So do you see this cultural transformation in a way?
Yes, I see that, but I'm also aware that this is for what Richard Florida can call the creative class or the knowledge class. Because again, if I want to be very provocative, I can tell you, if you have to clean toilets in my office, you have to go there, and you cannot do this from Portugal or a nice beach on. So we are talking about the happy few here. And what is interesting here is that the happy few not necessarily are the kinetic elite, to use the definition, but maybe the happy few are those who don't have to travel. And so I see here a lot of contradiction. As much as mobility, it's uneven distributed, also immobility can be uneven distributed. So you maybe are forced to move because you have to go to your place to work, you have to your office, to your factory, to your shop. While other people are happy enough that they can do this at home. And so this can be very, very arrogant to say, okay, all the world is like us. We're talking about just a layer of the society. the important part here, and this is understanding this weak signal, is usually in mobility, the behavior and the performance of the upper class, or let's say the creative class, has been then copied by everyone. If you think the first trip by trains were very expensive and just, of course, rich people can afford that, and now train is massified. The same goes for tramways, the same goes for planes, cars. So I wonder how much this cultural change of different opinions of what is mobility and mobility speed and slowness now is relegated to some very tiny layers of the society, but we don't know much this will become a model for other social layers in the next decades. And this is the real point here. But we are talking just about personal preference and possibly a chance to do that. The other question that we have is the elephant in the room, which is the climate change. And I'm not an engineer, but it's very easy to understand that speed is requiring more energy to move, because the resistance of air and the resistance on the wheels on the square of the speed. So faster you go, and then you need the square of energy. So my point here is that we should praise slowness, not just because it can satisfy some of us, but also because it's a good way to reduce the damage. Because if we go slow, we need less energy. Mm-hmm. And this is the good point to discuss about this topic, and can become even an asset for the industry, because a lot of industry are starting to sell slowness as marketing. I just noticed at the bus stop here, exactly under my house, the advertising is "Let the city overtake you, go slow." That was really remarkable how this is addressing the need of of sharing mobility users. They understand very well what these people want, which is the mindset. But this is also a way to create a new normative idea of what is mobility. So everyone looks at that advertising, and this is disseminating quite. It's disseminating quite a new mindset among the population. So I see a lot of elements here coming together and addressing these topics in a different way. Also, the industry is aware of that.
Let me go back to the kinetic elite you mentioned before. If we can precise more the concept. We have the impression that is not related to traveling more or less, or slow or fast, but is more a matter of synchronicity, in a sense that these people can decide when they move, and they control their own time, their own schedules, and when they go, and by how they move. So in a way, it's a matter of synchronicity. It's not a matter of not going fast. It's a matter of being in control of the way you move. You understand the concept the same way?
Yes, it's the way, but I would add that is not just the way to control mobility, but also control speed and control immobility. So in other words, is that you don't have to be somewhere at that moment. You can take all the time you want. And if you wish, you go speed, you go fast. If you wish, you go slow. If you wish, you don't move at all. Mm-hmm. You control totally your agenda, because when we talk about the concept of speed, I mentioned before the 1920s, the concept of speed or efficiency as we create in the 20s after the Great War, not by chance, is that we have all to perform at the best. And the best is to be very active and be always on time. The 20s was the moment they told us to be very on time, to be very consistent, and to go as fast as possible. We have Charlie Chaplin parody of the assembly line, which is another way to define what is speed also. Mm-hmm. I think that the moment you control your agenda, you reverse that, or you overtake that. You don't have to respect an agenda which is made by acceleration. and synchronicity. So you don't have to be synchronized. The other people has to synchronize to you. And this is possible if you are crazy rich, because everyone has to perform according to you. But again, I think that a lot more people are getting frustrated by the acceleration, getting frustrated also in the creative world by these gig performance and the gig economy. The great resignation wave happened during COVID is a sign of a lot of people getting a little bit burned out by this stressful environment. And you don't need to scroll too much LinkedIn to understand that people are very frustrated with the boss, people are very frustrated with timetable, people. So I think that it's the tip of the iceberg of social, at this point individual, of course, but social element which is not satisfied. And this is affecting mobility too. We don't accept anymore, like it was in 2000, 2010, to travel like crazy and to have 3 meetings a week in 2 different cities. And people are getting a little bit tired of that because it's not rewarding too much. And then COVID put another pressure because we discovered, the whole system discovered what we already knew, that we can do that. What we're doing, I'm talking about these layers of us, we can do more or less everything whenever we are. Maybe not in New Zealand because you have time zone problems, but that's a big change. And we don't know where we are going with that, how much will impact. And as I say before, how much this will have a cascade effect on other levels of society, where other people will start to say, me too, I'm not happy. How can we fix that?
So you will say that mobility injustices grow. So the kinetic elite is very small, and the large number of people are suffering more because of mobility, because they are forced to move 2 hours per day to go to work, because they are forced to move in a mass transport system, which is not comfortable at all. Do you think that mobility poverty, I think you use this concept, mobility poverty or peripheral mobilities, all of this is growing in our world? So you are pessimistic in this way, or this is being in a way improving?
Well, justice is something that you don't find so easy on this planet. So, of course, there is a problem, mobility poverty, which I wrote a book with Tobias Kutler on that. So, open access, by the way. I'm trying as much as possible to publish open access in these days. The question of the kinetic elite is that I want to put even bolder stress here that we still think that mobility is an asset. And I wonder how much this is true in these days, how much we overestimate mobility as a choice, while we have daily examples of forced mobility, where people are forced to move. You have to go to the office, you have to go to the factory, and you have to get these crowded commuting buses and the very unsatisfactory public transport system, or 2 hours queue in every city of Latin America or Italy, whatever. There is a lot of forced mobility, and we still label that mobility as something as an asset, while it's a burden. And then we have more extreme ways of forced mobility. I'm thinking of in Berlin now we have about 100,000 refugees from Ukraine at the moment. That's the latest number. And this is another way of defining mobility as forced mobility. So what is important here is that in the past 2 centuries, we romanticize mobility. Mobility is like Janus, has 2 faces. One is positive, one is negative. So we romanticize the positive side, which is true. It's not. I don't want to say that it's not true, but mobility has been always considered empowerment. Physical mobility can offer you social mobility. Think about the migration. Italian people went everywhere from Canada to Argentina to Australia, and that was also an opportunity to climb the social ladder. Mobility is opening your mind. that was the reason of the Grand Tour for the European elite, to discover new way of thinking. And we are doing the same as tourists, as students, Erasmus. So this positive side is 100% true. We forgot the dark side of mobility. And what is interesting, suspending any judgment on that, is that in the past decades, we start to point out the dark side of mobility. And this can be papers, can be the critique of the Cinetic elite, can be flying shaming, which is happening now. I think that at least what I can see in North Europe, this is rather dominant element. Traveling as a burden is something that you would avoid because of CO2, and this we discuss with my kids' age people, and they tell you that. So I think that we are balancing now this idea of mobility as positive, and we consider more mobility also in the dark side. Let me add something a little bit curious, but very revealing. Traveling in English comes from travail. And travail comes from tripalium, which was a Roman torture. Because in the past, you have a globetrotter like Marco Polo or Bituta. They were crazy, they were traveling all life. But traveling, if you think more carefully, is quite suffering. And if you read Chaucer, Canterbury Tales, they tell each other stories because they say, we have to go to Canterbury for this pilgrimage together. Let's reduce the fatigue of the travel and let's talk about our stories. Because traveling is a work, is fatigue, is an effort. We forgot that. Because we glamorize mobility for very good reasons. I'm the first one traveling, but now we are back to this idea that traveling can be a burden. This is, again, a weak signal which is rather limited to maybe North Atlantic, limited to some layer of the society. But we should be aware that this can become very easily hegemonic. And the more the climate change will kick in, and the more will become an asset to stay immobile, because, I mean, you are destroying the planet with mobility. Mobility is one of the growing elements in CO2 emissions. It is the only one growing, as much as I know. The war in Ukraine show us how much we are dependent on fossil fuel and how much we missed an opportunities in the 70s after the oil crisis to give up on that. So suddenly you realize that we are trapped in this situation, and the cultural elements, the cultural value that we give to mobility are not anymore there. Mm-hmm. This is not just a philosophical problem. This is a problem already targeting some marketing offices and in the industry, some targeting the scenarios for companies. It's becoming a big issue. So I think that this is a problem for policymakers too.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about mobility as a right. I mean, it's true that has been romanticized. It's true that has a negative effect, but it's also true that is considered to be a right to move. Not any, I don't know to what extent this right of mobility is well restricted nowadays, or should be more restricted in the future, and how much the restrictions we suffered during the coronavirus pandemic has changed our perception of the right to move, not just as something that is a need or something that is a wish, but something we have the right to move. How do you think the right to move may change?
So let's put in a perspective. The worst that the society can do for each of us is giving us immobility in a prison. So mobility is a value. And the right to move is absolutely central, because the moment we try to put limitation on mobility, for climate reason or for economic reason or for fossil fuel reason, whatever is the reason, we know that will encourage more mobility injustice, because the rich and the powerful, they always find a way to avoid that. We know that. So touching this element of mobility rights is very political, and I wouldn't touch that at all. In the 2001 white paper of European Union on mobility, it was written, we cannot curb mobility. And I totally agree on that. But the question remains there, because we cannot touch that, because we know very well that this is very, very complicated and very political. But we know on the other way that we have to reduce CO2. I mentioned CO2, but there are a lot of other problems related to mobility. And this is the question that we have. We need to invent a way to keep the right of mobility and the right of immobility. Because remember, we have a lot of forced mobility. Mm-hmm. So the right of mobility, the right of immobility, and possibly the right of slowness, without hampering the chance we have to reduce the damage we are doing on the climate at the moment. And this is nearly impossible in my eyes. In that, I'm very pessimistic. I'm very pessimistic because it's very difficult to find the combination of the two elements where you leave anyway the freedom to move or not to move, but you try also to reduce the wheeled and motorized mobility, because that's very complicated. And the solution that have been offered actually are very weak. If you think of the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vest in France, the triggering point was the French government say, we raise the price of the fuel of 3-4 cents in order to pay subsidies for electric cars. And then you have the problem of such, I don't want to enter in the discussion how these people reacted. I'm not interested on that. I'm interested to notice, very, very zooming out, that in order to make subsidies for electric cars, which usually are bought by the elite, you are taxing the fuel of normal people that use that for forced mobility. It doesn't work in that way. We cannot do that because there will be a negative reaction. So we cannot do that way. First, because electric car are not the solution in my eyes. Or at least it's a good proposal, but I don't know much will fix the real problem. Secondly, if we want to be very serious about addressing the climate change and social injustice, we need to engage the users in a way we are not doing at the moment. We are not engaging any way the users. We don't have a clear governance. We don't have a real roadmap how to address the transition to a sustainability mobility. And this is the problem, actually. How we convince ourselves first, and then anybody else, that we have to change habits and lifestyle when it comes to mobility. And maybe getting a train to go to Italy also is 15 hours. Counter argument is 15 hours because no one is interested anymore in night trains. Now there is a resurgence, but why did it disappear? And all that, it's combined together. So your project about reconsidering the basic of mobility on a more theoretical, philosophical way is very welcome, because then, yes, we have to think this concept from the basic, from the start.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if you were aware of 34 years ago, Italian theorist called Cesare Marchetti, that developed the universal patterns of mobility. I think he said that 10% of the available income and 1 hour per day is more or less what people used to spend on mobility all over the world across civilizations. We had a previous talk with Marta Gonzalez. She's a physicist. She works in big data, developing artificial intelligence models. And this is what she applies. And she didn't know much about Cesare Marchetti. That is the reason so she comes from a pure scientific, mathematical, software engineering world. Yeah. And based on big data and artificial intelligence, she's developing models to forecast mobility on cities, and she's finding and she's rediscovering these principles across cities all over the world. So do you think that there is a sense on this is true? This is why this is happening. This is something which is part of our the way we are, the way our bodies are, something which is the biology we have as human beings. What do you think about this pattern?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And Marchetti and Zahavi, before him, they developed this idea, which is universal. You can be in countryside Tanzania or New York, Manhattan. You spend more or less 1 hour. I know that Vincent Kaufman worked on that topic too, and he discovered that actually in some countries it's rising a little bit for some milieu of people. So it's an average, of course. But altogether, we have these impelling needs to move. Mokatarian worked on teleworking, and they discovered that people after all day, like us, you stay all day in the office or home office, in this case, home office, and then you are a little bit, oh no, I need a walk, I need a drive because I'm crazy at home, I need to move. So the question is, we can say the mobility is an anthropological constant. I agree with that. Cavalli-Sforza was discussing about if we have a deep history going back to the out of Africa, you know, we come all out of Africa. And the question was, we left Africa because of environmental reason, there was some change, and then we need to look for food somewhere else, and we left Africa? Or was the curiosity to say what is beyond that hill, that mountain? Maybe both, because we are very symbolic animals, and we are very curious animals too. So the question is, we cannot say, okay, we make teleworking, home office, and with reduced mobility and everyone is happy, because you cannot squeeze that too much. Everyone was very frustrated, even with several serious issues during the lockdown, because we were impeded mobility and was a big suffering. Coming back to your question, if we want to be serious about where mobility is going and we want to have a roadmap towards sustainability, we cannot forget this anthropological element. And this is coming back to your first question. If you analyze that on the pure economic aspect, you miss completely these elements and all your recipe fails, because that's the point. Let me add that often in many cities in these days, the peak hours I'm speaking before COVID, the peak hours in traffic maybe are 11 o'clock in the evening, not 8 o'clock in the morning, because a lot of people are using mobility for recreational uses, and we close an eye on that. And so the question comes that if we want to be serious about these symbolic value and these anthropological constant, we should keep an eye on that. And even during teleworking, office call, whatever you want to call, we should keep in mind that there is this constant to move, to travel, to explore. And we should reduce, as I say, the damage we are doing, because moving is very impacting, actually. The moment we left Africa, we've done quite a mess already 60,000 years ago, killing a lot of megafauna all around the world. So, I mean, it's a big issue. We are very, very disruptive as a species. But yes, we should keep in mind that there is this constant of this need to move.
Still on anthropological issues. We are, of course, embodied, so we cannot put our bodies outside ourselves. We are the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, the experience we have on active mobility when we are walking, the way we think about the rest of the world when we are walking is different than when we are riding a bike, probably, and it's different than when we are driving a car. Maybe
yes.
Maybe when we are driving a car, maybe we forget our body, probably. When we are flying in a jet, but when we are sailing, then maybe is a way for us to meditate. So, or when we are in a train, So it seems that the experience we have as human beings moving in one way or the other is also different. So sometimes we want to walk, we need to walk. Sometimes we prefer to ride a bike. So the experience is very different. It's not just a matter of moving one place to the other for the more efficient way. It has a different meaning.
Yes.
Probably.
Well, of course, and well, Tim Cresswell, you already had him mentioned the 6 elements of mobility. One is the experience you have. And the experience is different, of course, according also to the different means you use for mobility. So if you are on a boat or walking, is totally different than riding a car. I'm thinking also what Peter Merriman wrote about the taskscape of mobility by cars. He wrote about the English motorways. This idea that we create, even our cities actually, are created around the experience or the taskscape, the visual need that you have to drive a car. So we create our city according to the driver, according to the experience of the driver. This comes from the huge quantity of paraphernalia we have about traffic lights, indication to turn left, or parking indication, and the horizontal indication, and even the design of the streets are made, everything is made for the cars. So this is not just the concept of experience. These experiences are shaped our cities to the point that now we discover that maybe it's not the best for many reasons, because it's polluting, it's impacting, it's reducing mobility of other people, the mobility and justice we mentioned before. And there is a lot of advocacy to reverse that, to reverse the design of the city away from the mobility of the drivers to a more democratic mobility, a slow mobility maybe, or no motorized mobility. And this will be the challenge for the next 20, 30 years, if we are in time, because the clock is clicking, so we need to rush a little bit because we cannot wait too much. This is the real effort we have, is to reconsider how these experiences are shaped our way of designing the cities, and not just the cities, how much we use too much the idea of the driver as an example. But let me say that I started with Goethe, and I think that this is also somehow misleading, because we democratize the idea of Goethe, but the model is still a white, male, adult, European, rich. And I wonder how much of our imaginary about driving are based on James Bond mobility, which is another white, male, adult, aggressive, rich, psychopath killer. I mean, let's say that. So I think that this is the real point. We design the experience of a fraction of the society was becoming popularized and glamorized in terms of driving, but you think about in terms of traveling. What I think that is difficult now is even James Bond, I think sooner or later will use a bike, a sharing bike in his movie, because that's a new idea of thinking what is mobility, even for such a character. Because the mindset is changing, but there is a resistance by the city to change, by the cities, and our mindset too, to change completely the approach. Is not anymore that model of the white male dominant vision of mobility. It doesn't work. We need to think in a less white, less male, less European way, less adult. Let's think about the mobility of the kids and mobility of the elderly. That's the story we should tell. I don't see this coming. What I see coming is try to reinvent the wheel, literally, with electric cars or autonomous vehicles. And which is a wonderful achievement. Chapeau to the engineers. They are doing great stuff there. And it's welcome because we are reducing fossil fuel. But I don't see the systemic change. The real point, unfortunately, is the lifestyle. We cannot have the 1920s model of lifestyle for the 2022 world. It doesn't work for many cultural reasons, environmental reason, economic reason, and I can go ahead on that. This is the real point where I see also a silver line, because a lot in people in the industry, the clever people in the industry, are thinking it's not working. So I see also the potentiality to engage the private sector there, and even to, I'm also to say that despite they don't have a good reputation, which is absolutely not the case, in Brussels, I notice a lot of offices are very interested on these elements to reconsider in a wider way mobility, and your project is an example of that. So it will be difficult. We have to redo the city or undo the city as be done. But I think that I hope that there will be some positive elements coming. But this is the case. The experience has to change. And a lot of people already change what they expect in mobility, which is the experience they want to have. And they're not giving too much symbolic value anymore to mobility. As much as, like my kids, give me a computer and internet, I'm happy to play on the computer for 15 hours. Who cares? I'm not interested in fancy airplanes. It's not for everyone, but this is a weak signal, and we have to understand this is growing, because this will be a huge effect.
Yeah. Yeah, and however, we see the advertisement of BMW saying at the end, do you like driving? At the end, do you like driving? So it seems that maybe one thing is what we do believe that is right and we should do, and the other thing is that still there is a large market for
of course, yes.
So, and still technology and businesses are moving in the direction of reliability, speed, control, and not really.
Well, you mentioned before, when you are under the wheel, you don't feel anymore your body, but this is a hybrid. You control 1 ton of plastic and metal, and this is very empowering. So I think this is very interesting, how much there is a lot of symbolic value to control technology. And this was really the reason for the success of the car at the beginning. I think this is still an asset. And if we are serious to reconsider mobility in this hegemonic way and to move somewhere else, we shouldn't consider this as a relic of the past, but try to understand why this model has been so successful. Why this idea of empowerment that driving a car or being on a plane gives you, because that's an asset for keeping the situation as it is, for business as usual, just changing the engine. And I think that we maybe should invent also a way to how to satisfy this need. Maybe we can make a park team where you ride the car very fast for once a month, because you are happy to do that. Why not? I mean, it's better than having a lot of cars in the roads. You have these sort of ideas. I'm provocative here, but we need to understand these cultural symbolic elements of mobility, because otherwise we will never be successful in transition. The change, the cultural change will be too slow.
One important change will be if economists and engineers that work on the field and the way are influencing many decisions, they can understand what we are talking, and not just understand but apply. Let's say still the cost-benefit analysis, still the ways to assess policies are based on this idea of productivity, measuring, saving times, and so on. Let's say we fail often to explain, and not to explain, to convince our colleagues to say, okay, let's consider a public transport as, is people when are using public transport, they are not just being transported, they are living on the train, living on the bus, and they are living together with other people that, as you said before, are not the same. People of different ages, different origins, people that are moving for different purposes, and they are living together. It's a matter of conviviality, and this is what the cities, European cities, are all about. Everybody together, being different and being able to live together. And the same on public spaces, public transport. But then we fail in a way until now to introduce these as social benefits, these obvious social benefits, into the way we assess investments on transport systems. This is kind of a problem we have, maybe from humanities, social sciences, and economic and engineering university should go together much more in order to influence one to the other in a much more effective way that we do nowadays. Because the mindset
I agree.
of engineering and economics is not what we are saying right now.
Yes, I agree. I'm totally with you. And in order to be successful to break these boundaries, we have to understand why these boundaries are there. And there are at least two reasons. One, as I mentioned before, if you talk about food or fashion, that's not the basic need. This is not the economic realm. Is more fashion, is more symbolic value, is the identity you create with fashion and food. We are still trapped in mobility to the idea that mobility is something that we have to consider only on the economic point of view. And this is the biggest problem we have, because if we have this mindset, we will never be able to open up the discussion. The second point is that, unfortunately, the knowledge in our Western society is organized in sectors. And every sector has their own jargon, their own power, of course. And it's very difficult to discuss because jargons are different. People are afraid to lose power. So there are many reasons why it's not working. Additionally, I think that there is also a problem to change the main attitude of many policymakers. The industry is having the same problem to create a new generation of managers able to have a more holistic view. So this can be a positive factor because there is a pushing factor to be more active in addressing new elements. But altogether, yes, we should have more moment where we talk each other. It will be difficult. There will be a lot of misunderstandings. I'm totally aware of that. And I think that still is worthwhile to try. Actually, we should try more, and we should have more moment where we can do that. But it's not easy. It's not easy. No. Let me add, because in 53 minutes, we mentioned only passengers mobility, which is just a part of the slice. But I would like to address also the concept of logistic, which is huge. And to some extent, we have similar problem in logistic. I don't want to repeat the usual discussion about the globalization that is destroying this and that. But the question that also in logistic, we have sort of kinetic elite, which maybe can be massified these days. But the next time you go to a supermarket, if you live in Europe, try to have a look at the avocados label and try to see where they're coming from and how they arrive to your supermarket. And then you discover that often they're coming from Chile by plane. And so I would say that here I'm making the avocado with my students always as an example. Our mobility is not just the people mobility, but again, we need to address also the logistic mobility. We need to address and here too, we have counter example, the 0 kilometer consumption or the local farms website where you can order, or the groups buying together. One people are going to the farm and buy for other 20 people in the same building. We have counter example how people are coming back for different reasons. Maybe just we're talking, of course, again to a layer of society where we are readdressing mobility in other ways. And this is impacting at the moment very, very little part, but this is another way to think mobility, and we should also rethink ourselves. I mentioned before the out of Africa theory, where we left Africa because we colonized all the planet, but we define ourselves as a very sedentary society. But if we think more carefully, we are not sedentarists at all. We blame nomad people to move a lot, but I mean, if you think of the Phoenicians, they were the first settling in Lebanon, today's Lebanon, and they spread all around the Mediterranean Sea, and they were settlers. So you have the contradiction that our society likes to define ourselves as a sedentarist, but then we move a lot. And we don't move just us. The avocado is a good example of how much mobility is embedded in everyday mobility. I can tell you about this bottle of water. My bottle of water, I have a lot of water mobility in my building, coming from the pipelines, of course. That's mobility too, electricity. We should have this holistic impression about mobility, and then we discover that we move a lot beyond our bodies. And this is another big issue because logistic, I fear that is more impacting than passengers' mobility. And this is the forgotten child of the discussion. There we have a lot to work, a lot to address, and rethink how we should also there reduce our impact, how to be serious about mobility justice, even in logistics, and about the environmental crisis there too. Because making avocado travel, I don't eat avocados anymore, unfortunately. I like avocados. I stopped it after I discovered they come by plane from Chile. Makes no sense. It's it's crazy, right? So it's becoming very, very hard topic. Giving up on avocados was not easy at all for me. So let me say that there is a lot more in this change than passengers' mobility.
Yeah.
As I said, the example there too of changing this idea of what we need to move around us in terms of object, liquid or electricity to make our lifestyle running. And we can work on that too, quite a lot.
Yeah, actually, we live in a networked society, in a global society, as Manuel Castells used to say. So
Yep.
it's people, freight, energy, water, resources, material, food. At the end is also information. So we are connected to all these networks. And Massimo, great conversation. I think we are just about to finish because we are just about 1 hour. Let me not ask last question, but kind of conclusion if we can. And I don't know if the conclusion could be what we call it now. Everybody call the tempo giusto. So finally, for all these things which are moving in the British society, but for ourselves, which are the most precious thing we have, ourselves and the society of us, we have to begin introducing emphasizing, being more aware the value of the meaning, the value in terms of meaning of mobility. So it's not just a useful activity that we need, it's also something that we wish is part of our desire. So it has to be meaningful for us and for the rest of us, let's say. So this more humanistic view of mobility, which is surprising in a way that we have to emphasize this when it's quite obvious, but actually is not in the books of transport engineering or economics engineering. This which is so obvious, but it's not there. So maybe this idea of reintroducing the concept of tempo giusto, which is not just saving time, as we say in economy, saving time, marginal cost of time, but it's just tempo giusto. What do you think? This could be kind of conclusion for this.
Yes, it's a good way to stop, because the tempo giusto gives us the idea what is mobility and how we can use mobility. So it's not saving time, it's not blaming because you have to wait, it's trying to be more in synchrony with everything else, including the environmental issue. Because the moment you try to be more synchronized with this long-term vision of what is mobility, then you realize that speed is not exactly what we need. We have social counter arguments. Our society is asking to go very fast. I have 2 kids. I'm very busy with them. I cannot afford to spend, let's say, 2 days to go to a conference to Madrid by train. I have the social pressure, the family pressure that I have other duties. So it's a very systemic change. The moment we get serious on that, is becoming very systemic immediately, because then we have to address a lot of other elements which are pushing us to be fast. And I'm doing quite a privileged work because, but I understand. Imagine that you told your boss I have to go to Madrid. I will go by train from Berlin. It will take, I think, 25 hours by train. Will be so. This tempo giusto, it's very, very important because opens up a lot of elements beyond mobility. And again, the idea also of what is mobility, the multitasking, is the idea that mobility is a waste of time. It's incredible that we still have that. Finally, as you said, we should talk more with policymakers, and maybe next time someone writes an engineering book on how to make a motorway, so we should talk with us too, actually, discussing if we need a motorway, and be how to design that. Why have to design a motorway to go 130 kilometers an hour? You can design a motorway going slow, which is a good way actually to save a lot of fossil fuel. And even my dear friends, the German dear friends, at some point will introduce a speed limit on the Autobahn, and because it makes no sense to go 200 kilometers an hour. For any perspective, makes no sense. Unless you want to satisfy this speed need, which is a social construction, but it's also something we say anthropological, the idea of conquering and moving. But I talk it too much. Thanks for
no, thank you very much. Thank you very much for all your insights, Massimo. We appreciate very much. This is recorded, so everybody can watch when they have the tempo giusto to do so.
Thanks again for the invitation. And I'm very appreciative of your project. I think it's doing great. And I hope that you can have a spin-off of this, because it's really going the right direction to reconsider what is mobility, immobility, slowness, and so on. So I'm very pleased to be part of this project.
Okay, thank you very much on behalf of everybody working there. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.